Hey pirate fans around the world, this is Blackbeard, the terror with lit fuses, real madness. He didn't win by cannon alone. He staged fear with smoking fuses, hostage medicine heists, and shallow water traps that made empires blink. Blackbeard, Edward Teach or Thatch, was more strategist than savage, a performer who used smoke, sound, and timing to freeze enemies before the first shot. In this voyage, the story lays out a clean timeline. It shows how a fear machine was built with slow-burning fuses and a beard, with a costume and a kiss, and a flag that spoke louder than speeches. It moves through the Charleston blockade, where medicine became a bargaining chip. It crosses the sounds of North Carolina to the last fight at Ocracoke. It listens to what artifacts say from the wreck of his flagship, and it ends with a clear verdict on what was madness, what was method, and what was myth. The stakes are simple and large. Understand how one captain rewired the psychology of sea warfare and why his legend still governs, how pirates are imagined. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with pirate stories whenever you want. The big question arrives early. So no one waits in fog. Was Blackbeard truly mad? A chaotic danger even to his own crew? Or was he a disciplined performer who used fear, medicine, and maneuver to control battles without wasting blood or powder? The plan is straightforward and calm. First, a snapshot that maps traits to real mechanics. Then a steady look at his early career and name. After that, the persona engine, lit fuses, greatcoat, pistols, and the silent message of a flag comes into focus. Next, the capture of a French slaver and the refit into the ship that gave him leverage, the vessel known as Queen Anne's Revenge. From there, the story anchors at Charleston in 1718, where a blockade showed how brains can be more dangerous than broadsides. Life on board will be explained in normal words, articles, shares, and routines, so listeners can feel the deck underfoot. Allies and politics will show how pardons and governors try to tame men who live by wind. Weapons and shallow water tactics will make sense without technical clutter. Medicine and rumor will separate smoke from true madness. Then a series of encounters builds toward the last day at Ocracoke, where a quiet plan met a loud legend. The aftermath, trials, printed propaganda, and the head on a bowsprit will be told without shock, because the facts carry their own weight. Finally, myth will be sifted from reality. Archaeology will do what archaeology does best: speak slowly and precisely, and a verdict will land with a soft, steady tone. For bearings, quick comparisons to contemporaries, Charles Venn Stade Bonnet and Bartholomew Roberts will help position Blackbeard on the map of the age. Let's take it step by step. Before the story dives into dates, a rapid trait map puts tools on the table. The famous smoking beard, slow match fuses twined into hair and hat, was a stage light for the face, a halo of sparks and smoke that reached an enemy's imagination before a single boarding hook flew. That is the film image. The real mechanic is simple. Slow match, the treated cord used to fire old-style muskets and cannon, smoldered at a steady rate and gave off smoke without a large flame. Set near the face and braided into the beard, it made the man look more than human in the worst way, like an omen that had learned to walk. Proof for this sits in depositions and in early printed accounts that describe the look not as a rumor, but as something seen in battle light. The untouchable escapes were not magic, just seamanship near creeks and inlets, where warships feared the bottom. A broader ship with a deeper draft, heavy with guns, could not dance in water that felt safe to a coastal pilot in a lighter sloop. That is why he loved sounds and shoals and hated straightforward open ocean duels. The record for this lies in charts, in soundings, and in the sad notes of captains who grounded while he slipped away along a path only locals knew. Warlord charisma did not mean a tyrant with a whip. It meant a captain who knew how to balance his authority with the power of a quartermaster and the promises written into ship articles. Crew shares were calculated so that risk felt like a contract. A leader who could deliver safety, profit, and a good story usually slept well. Early trial records and shipboard testimonies show how crews stuck with him, not out of blind fear, but because the system felt fair, even when the man looked frightening. 5 beats can be previewed to keep the first 10 minutes sharp. The capture of the French slaver La Concorde set the stage. The refit into Queen Anne's Revenge turned a prize into a flagship. The Charleston blockade made medicine a currency. The North Carolina pardon showed paperwork's power and limits. The Ocracoke fight ended the man and launched the legend. Now the story can spool back to origins without losing pace. Edward Teach, sometimes written Thatch, likely learned the trade as a privateer in the last years of the War of the Spanish Succession. Many men who fought legally for crowns drifted into piracy when peace arrived and ships sat idle while bills kept coming. Early sightings place him in the Bahamian world, near Nassau, a port that served as both stage and cafeteria for men between law and hunger. He was English, almost certainly, and his name arrived in records with the fuzziness common to the time. Clerks wrote what they heard through accents and through their own spelling habits. What matters is the shape of the man that emerges, tall, composed, and steady. Accounts paint him as fearsome to see and surprisingly measured to hear. A captain who bellowed all day would exhaust a crew. A captain who arranged moments like scenes and then returned to normal would keep a crew's trust. Early captures taught him the arithmetic he liked most. Speed plus intimidation equals surrender. With cargo intact, a shot across the bow, a sudden appearance from behind a headland, a line of men on deck already lit by burning match, and a flag that wrote a threat without a paragraph. These turned resistance into a calculation merchant. Captains did not enjoy solving. There is a difference between cruelty and efficiency, and the evidence points again and again toward a man who understood that terror could be staged to keep knives clean. The Persona engine deserves a gentle, thorough look, because it is the heart of why Blackbeard still lives in imagination centuries later. Slow matches braided into the beard and tucked near the brim are easy to picture because the physics are friendly. Slow match smokes. It is meant to, in a light wind, it streams thin lines that curl and cling. In heavy air, it gathers around the face like a mask. Ship decks are busy. Powder and rope and wood trade smells in a space only a little larger than a street. In that intense air, a figure who appears with moving smoke is instantly wrong to the animal brain. Ancient stories of fire and shape, the ones every culture knows, wake up and tug at courage. The greatcoat and sash, the pistols stuck like extra hands ready to grab, and the cutlass as both tool and prop made up the rest of the visual grammar. A captain who looked like a storm carried a storm's authority. The famous flag later artist would paint versions with hearts and spears, served as a message of mercy. If a surrender came quickly, and as a promise of no mercy. If defiance lasted too long, flags were vocabulary. He spoke fluently in cloth. Why performance saved powder is simple. A boarded ship with a crew already halfway to surrender is a safer space for both sides. Smoke and theater encouraged choices that kept cannon silent. Fear is a force multiplier when used with care. It makes an enemy act like a smaller army. It also keeps a crew on the right side of risk. Men who believe their captain can walk through smoke without flinching, pull harder on halyards and take fewer foolish chances. Queen Anne's Revenge. The name alone sounds like a sermon. Whispered through teeth, was born as La Concorde, a French slaver. When he took her in 1717, he took more than a hull. He took capacity, volume for men, guns and supplies. The refit mattered as much as the capture. Guns were moved, rigging adjusted, and deck spaces organized for boarding. A former slaver, built for speed and endurance with a grim purpose, became a coastal brawler with broader shoulders and more hands at the rail. Draft and speed were balanced for the work he liked most. A heavy frigate can make an admiral smile in a painting. A ship that can thread shallow channels makes a captain smile in real life. When he needs to vanish around a spit of sand no one else trusts. In negotiations, the silhouette of a powerful flagship is a sentence the other side understands. People surrender to a future they can picture. A dark mass full of guns writes that picture in air. In May 1718, The story reached the low coast of South Carolina, and the harbor of Charleston learned what it feels like to have a sea gate held by someone who knows the value of time. The blockade was not about glory. It was about bargaining. Several ships were taken at the approaches. Passengers and crew, among them important citizens, became leverage. The demand surprised some. Medicine, not chests of coins. In a world of bad water, fevers, infections, and hard surgery, medicine was life and control. A captain who held the medicine chest held a piece of the future. Requests focused on supplies that made sense: and bandages, remedies for infections common among crews far from clean ports, and items to treat the quiet injuries ships inflict: cuts, splinters that threaten to fester, and diseases passed hand to hand and mouth to mouth. The city delayed, of course. Cities always do when pride and fear share a chair. But time bent in the pirates' direction, because every hour a harbor stays closed is an hour of lost trade that no merchant forgets. The bargain was done. Hostages were returned. Cargo was taken, yes, but the real prize was a reputation that sailed faster than any schooner. The lesson was clean. Put the right pressure on the right nerve and a city will move. Life on board, under a theatrical captain, felt surprisingly orderly. Articles, shipboard rules agreed to by the crew, shaped behavior. Shares of plunder were assigned, with extra for dangerous roles, and for leaders, but not so much extra that bitterness lived between decks. A quartermaster balanced the captain, handling discipline and day-to-day fairness. Food was what ships allowed: salted meat, hard biscuit, dried peas, and whatever fresh supplies could be bought or taken. Water was guarded like gold. Rum or other spirits, mixed with water. Grog kept the liquid safe and the mood steady. Watches turned in a rhythm all ships know. Hands moved from deck to hammock, and back by a clock the sun cannot see. Punishments existed, but the goal was order, not pain. Few leaders ruined the morale that keeps sails full. Under a man who controlled fear with theater, discipline did not need to shout. It spoke in routines, and in the coin of trust. Allies and frenemies stepped in and out of the picture. Stayed Bonnet, the gentleman who tried to learn piracy, as if it were a language with polite grammar, crossed paths, and cruised with Blackbeard. Their connection shows a captain comfortable with managing people of different backgrounds and temperaments. Nassau in the Bahamian world provided a social network of sorts, where news and favors traveled between captains like bottles on a tide. In North Carolina, after Charleston, a quieter interlude unfolded. A pardon was sought. A small legal life was tried on for size. Bathtown appears in the record as a place where a famous man walked streets like anyone else, and considered whether paperwork could change who he was. Governors, always measuring more than one scale, sometimes saw value in taming a pirate with ink rather than with rope. The line between legitimate privateering, tolerated smuggling, and outright piracy was thin on paper and thinner when a governor's friends needed goods brought in by sunrise. These deals and detours kept options open but raised risk. Every bargain a pirate makes with land draws a map for the hunt that follows. Fearcraft and violence live on a decision tree. At the first fork, fire or show teeth. Fire destroys cargo and stiffens resistance. Teeth, smoke, noise, sudden appearance can produce surrender while leaving goods untouched. The math of surrender is human. A merchant captain thinks of crew, cargo, owner, and family. A show that suggests invincibility tips the equation toward raising hands. Hostages, when taken, are an ugly tool, but in his hands they were also timekeepers. A set of captives, feeding a deadline, pushes city fathers into action in ways cannon cannot. Parley signals white flags, shouted terms. A single shot, as a sign to talk, belonged to a shared language at sea. He spoke that language with fluency and timing. In this decision tree, violence is not the trunk. It is a heavy branch used when lighter branches break. Weapons and boarding tactics looked messy to the eye, and felt almost choreographed to the men who practiced them. Pistols gave a close-range punch. sometimes carried in multiples so that reloading could wait until the deck was safe. Cutlasses favored slashing in tight quarters where elegant swords snagged on rope and belaying pins. Small grenados rolled or tossed into crowded corners broke the shape of a defense and opened a path. The boarding itself, hooks thrown, lines crossed. The first men over a rail was planned chaos. It was loud, hot, and full of splinters. But behind the noise lay simple steps practiced until feet found them without thinking. Once aboard, speed mattered more than style. Weapons found purchase, orders cut through the air, and within minutes, a scene that started as a storm became a negotiation under smoke. Now, the shallow water chessboard that kept him safe can be seen. Sounds and inlets along the Carolina coast invited small vessels and punished heavy ones. Tides ran like moods, channels wandered, sandbars moved between seasons. In this maze, he knew how to disappear. A warship built for ocean battle hated this world. Its captain risked grounding in exchange for a target that could at any moment walk away over water only a few feet deeper than a man is tall. He used the shoals to split pursuers and the tides to carry him away while larger vessels winced and waited. Coastal pilots, local men who knew the way water changes color over sandbanks and the way a line goes slack when the bottom rises, were his silent allies. Health, medicine, and the madness label fit together in a way that rewards slow thinking. A ship's medicine chest held the tools of the time. Ointments for skin, powders for pain and fever, instruments for small surgery, and tools for long, careful treatments that sailors endured with clenched teeth. Common ailments were simple and serious: infections from cuts, boils from friction, and heat, fevers brought by mosquitoes, and venereal diseases passed along in ports where loneliness sat in doorways like a vendor. On his ships, medical supplies were not decoration, they were survival. That makes the Charleston demand for medicine feel less theatrical and more strategic. What of madness? Smoke around a face is not madness. It is stagecraft. Loud entrances are not a diagnosis. They are tactics. Contemporary voices sometimes painted him as monstrous because they needed a story that warned boys in taverns not to grow up and try this life. Pamphlets sold better when villains snarled. A measured view, built from actions rather than adjectives, shows a man who saved powder with fear, saved crews with negotiation, and saved himself with geography. If madness is a lack of method, the evidence points the other way. The press helped build madness into a brand, because brands make arrests into victories before a rope is tied. A few encounters and escapes before the end show the pattern. A prize taken by surprise at dawn reveals a theme. He valued hours when light and shadow made mistakes likely. False colors, the practice of flying another flag until a target came close, bought him range without a chase. At times he let a captured vessel burn as a signal to others that rescue would be costly. At other times he spared a prize to keep friends in ports he might need next month. Sudden fades, disappearing into a creek mouth with sails trimmed just so, left pursuers angry and heavy. These moments taught lessons that shaped the final act. The value of bait, the danger of underestimating a quieter opponent, and the way boldness can turn into a blind corner if a captain expects fear to work on every man. The last day begins to take shape across water that does not sleep. Ocracoke Inlet lies among the outer banks, where islands are thin and the sea likes to trade places with the sound. In November 1718, Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy brought 2 small sloops under the authority of a colonial governor who had decided that a pirate with famous smoke was at last too large a shadow for the coast. Maynard knew he could not win a gun duel against a man who comforted himself with cannon. He chose a fencer's answer: come close and cut. Hidden Marines crouched below deck. A deck left bare of visible soldiers looked like a gift to a captain used to winning by stare. The plan was bait and spring. Heads up on this. It will be told slowly in the second half so that every step lands with sense and no scene needs to shout. For a moment, the story steps back to show how the world arranged itself around such men. with laws and proclamations. Piracy acts set death at the end of a chain of events that began with a signature on a charge. Royal proclamations offered pardons to divide crews. Amnesties fractured friendships that gold alone could not mend. Governors wrote letters that felt like nets and sometimes were. The hunts that followed a famous blockade gathered speed, because time, like wind, prefers to leave ports clear. A port too often closed by a single captain becomes a testimony against the officials who allowed it. Myth sits politely to one side and waits for its turn to be sordid. Did he keep multiple wives in different towns, visiting them like a traveling showman? The record thins here. Much of that warmth comes from pamphlets that like to imagine domestic chaos as a mirror of sea chaos. Did he bury treasure? A few men did. Most spent it, moved it, or lost it in the arithmetic of risk. Did he make pacts with devils? Sailors in all ages love stories that explain luck with friends in strange places. The verdict later will treat each claim with the same gentle hand. What sources say, where the silence speaks louder, and how exaggerations grew like vines on a wall that does not complain. Archaeology gives one of the most reliable voices in this chorus, and it speaks through iron, glass, and bone. Off the Carolina coast, near Beaufort Inlet, a wreck believed to be the remains of Queen Anne's Revenge has been studied carefully. From that site come cannons and gun parts, some cast, some wrought tools for repair, anchors that knew how to hold on, and medical gear that matches the story told earlier, instruments that hint at long voyages, at infections treated with earnest patience, and at a crew that valued a surgeon's steady hands. Heavy shot sits side by side with small lead balls. Grape shot, the kind that turns a deck into a place to lie down, has been seen. Apothecary weights whisper of powders measured in the same care that ledgers measured shares. Conservation work takes years because the sea keeps its grip. Objects brought up must be slowly taught how to live in air again. Patient work protects truth. Quick work pleases crowds and ruins knowledge. The calm pace is a sign of respect. Maps and havens provide the stage on which this story danced. Ocracoke, Topsail, and Beaufort Inlets, Cape Fear and New Providence routes made a chessboard. The outer banks are threads of sand that move a little each year and a lot in certain storms. Channels are like moods, mercurial and honest. A captain who knew them well could write a path off the top of his head. Hunters who learned the same water learned how to wait at the right bend. Geography in this tale is not background. It is a character with lines. The crew economy and the black market web form the quiet financial skeleton of the legend. Plunder became money through fences. Merchants who bought goods at discounts that made honesty blush and profit smile. Sometimes goods were claimed as salvage in courts that knew how to look at papers and not at faces. Shares gave every man a stake in the next sunrise, with the captain and quartermaster paid to match their burden. Getting rich was possible. Staying alive to spend money was the bigger prize. The stories that made boys clap in taverns told more of gold than of bills. But below deck, the real prize was often a safe harbor, a clean shirt and a meal bought with coins no one asked about. Memory and media changed. Blackbeard every time a new hand drew him. Early engravings emphasized weapons and hair and the long shape of a ship. Ballads gave him a rhythm that makes walking easier. Victorian retellings added a theatrical darkness that suited their taste for morality plays. Modern film and television turned him into a symbol of piracy itself, sometimes folding other men's deeds into his long coat because a story with one giant is easier to sell than a story with 5 men of medium size. Each era added pieces and shaved edges. What didn't change was the core, a captain who understood how people think when the sea is loud. Evidence falls into buckets that anyone can carry without spilling. Trial records put human voices on paper and give questions and answers in words that rarely pretend to be poetry. Logs and depositions set down times and places. Pamphlets and newspapers paint feelings as facts. They need reading with a smile and a pencil to mark where a writer sells, as much as he tells. Archaeology gives the patience that ink sometimes lacks. The way to weigh them is simple. Ask who wrote a thing, for whom and why. When several sources born far from each other lean in the same direction, a steady truth usually waits there. At this point, listeners can feel a verdict forming, but the tale will hold it for just a while longer. Because the last fight deserves the space to breathe. For now, the decision stands ready in quiet words. Intimidation as a strategy, medicine as leverage, seamanship as a shield, madness as a useful mask. What is solid will be named. What is likely myth will be set aside gently. What remains unknown will be left as open water, respected for being what it is. Before the final act, a short round of answers keeps curiosity company. Did the beard fuse trick risk self-injury? Yes, a careless ember could scorch hair or skin, but slow match smolders more than flares, and experience teaches where to tuck smoke safely. Was he the most violent of all pirates? Evidence suggests he preferred the threat of violence to the act, using intimidation to shorten fights. Did he always fight drunk? Stories love that image. Reality suggests a captain sober enough to plan and adapt. Was the famous flag his invention or later art? Variants exist in drawings and accounts. Flags were messages that shifted, and later artists sharpened them into icons. Did he command hundreds? At his peak with a flagship and consorts, he could bring large numbers to bear, but crews changed with fate and choices. Was Charleston about gold or medicine? It was focused on medicine, though other goods were taken. The demand told cities that he understood their soft points. Did he bury treasure? Likely not as a routine. Wealth moved through spending, shares and quick deals. Could a frigate catch him in the sounds? Not easily. Shallow water chose sides, and heavy warships rarely liked the side it chose. For those who wish to learn more later, the path is gentle. Collections of trial records and depositions give raw voices. Colonial newspapers show what people believed in the week news arrived. Wreck reports and conservation notes from the site, believed to be Queen Anne's revenge, provide grounded facts that rise from sand and salt. Scholarly overviews and regional museums connect the dots without drowning anyone in footnotes. Search terms will do the rest. Now the tide pulls the story toward Ocracoke, where smoke met silence, and the habit of winning faced a plan designed by someone who refused to be impressed. The second half will slow down and walk that deck from both directions, calmly, so that the ending fits the man who earned it. Not a shout, but a set of clear steps taken at the right time, with water close enough to touch. The tide carries the story into the narrow water where the end waits. Ocracoke lies low and lean, a place where the sea and the sound trade conversations in shifting channels. A famous captain sits at anchor after a season of bargaining and boldness. The water is quiet enough to mirror a mast. The air smells of tar and marsh. Far off, two small sloops move like unimportant errands in the morning light. Their decks look strangely empty. Lieutenant Robert Maynard has read the lessons the coast has taught for months. He knows that cannon against cannon would waste men and wood. He chooses something older and smaller. Trick and nerve. Marines crouch out of sight below deck. Muskets are loaded. Blades lie ready. The order is simple and calm. Keep the deck clear. Take the first blows, and then rise when the enemy believes the fight is already won. The bait is a deck without bodies. The spring is the men hidden under planks. A warning shot opens the conversation. Blackbeard answers with what the sea expects from him. Confidence dressed in smoke. His crew fires heavy guns from close range. The opening volley bites wood and throws splinters into air. One of Maynard's sloops staggers. Men fall. The deck that looked empty now looks wounded. And that is exactly the look the plan needs. Maynard holds his nerve. The sloops drift closer. Grapnels fly. Ropes catch. Hull kisses hull. This is the distance the legend prefers. And this is the distance the lieutenant needs. On cue, hatches burst open, and Marines come up in a rush. The quiet deck becomes a living hedge of muskets and cutlasses. The next moments are tight and hot. Pistols crack at the length of a plank. A grenade rolls and shatters a corner into smoke and screams. The boards are slick. Boots find purchase because practice has taught them how. Witnesses later remember a man taller than most, with hair braided and smoke curling against his cheeks, stepping into the thickest part of the press. They remember him using pistol and blade with the economy of someone who knows that breath is a resource. They remember him laughing, or they think they do. Memory loves a gesture that matches a reputation. He fights toward Maynard. The two meet like figures drawn by a steady hand. A cutlass swings and bites. A pistol flares and misses by a small mercy. The men around them crowd in and fall away like a tide. Blackbeard is hit once, then again. Powder burns stained cloth. A musket ball marks his body, where a story will later count the wounds with the careful pride of a clerk, balancing a ledger. He keeps moving the way a habit keeps moving after the reason for it is gone. Then the final blow lands, simple and close. The man who seemed larger than the deck falls onto the deck, and in that contact, the legend changes shape. What follows is policy, written in a language the coast understands. The head is taken and shown on a bowsprit, like a word few wish to read twice. The body, according to later tellers, sinks in water that remembers everything. A rumor soon swims ahead of the facts, saying the body circled the ship, counting a dozen laps before surrendering to the sound. It is a good rumor. It belongs in a tavern and not in a court. The courts receive the prisoners who did not die in the smoke. They answer questions. They give names. They accept sentences that include whipping, labor, and death by rope. Governors write to distant superiors with measured satisfaction. Newspapers summarize the event in paragraphs designed to make parents point at the page and say to their children, trials in Virginia and the Carolinas turn men into examples. Captured crew members speak about articles and shares. Some try to step onto the narrow bridge called a pardon, arguing that a date is a line and that they stood on the legal side of it when a particular act occurred. The law does not always agree. Judges quote proclamations promising mercy if men surrender by a fixed day, and they quote statutes that call piracy by its plain name. Where evidence reaches clearly, the rope reaches too. Where evidence blurs, judges sometimes choose a smaller punishment that still writes a sentence into public memory. The head on the bowsprit writes the biggest sentence. Sermons harvest it for moral lesson. Prints and pamphlets copy it until it is difficult to remember that the detail was one decision by one officer on one day. The law's machinery needs a short explanation because it explains the timing of this end. Royal proclamations offered pardons to dissolve crews. They worked. Often, a crew that argued among itself about surrender grew less dangerous at sea and more vulnerable in court. Legislation defined piracy broadly and set penalties that allowed colonial officials to act with confidence. A governor who tolerated a famous pirate for too long risked his reputation. A governor who struck at the right moment gained a paragraph in a report that traveled home with approval folded inside. This is why, after Charleston, after the flirtation with life on paper in Bath, the hunt grew louder. The coast's patience is long, but merchants' patience is short, and the politics of patience are shorter. Myths have waited politely, and now take their turn. Multiple wives scattered along the coast make a fine anecdote. The record is thin and fond of counting. The simplest read is that the legend borrowed from stories about other men and gave them to a single name because a single name is easier to tell. Buried treasure sits on the same shelf. Some pirates cached goods temporarily while moving on a crowded coast. Most converted plunder quickly to supplies, wages, and the quiet comfort of paid friends. Pacts with devils live in the oldest part of the sailor's mind, the part that gives storms faces and currents moods. They are poetry, not paperwork. Drinking all day fits the loud picture too. A captain who planned blockades and baited naval officers with tricks understood that clear thought is a tool sharper than any sword. The flag, with heart and spear and hourglass in later images, was a language of threat that changed over time. Some versions are contemporary. Others are embroidered by later artists who painted what the story felt like, rather than what the deck saw. What matters is the message: mercy if surrender comes quickly, ruin if it does not. Archaeology brings the voice that does not try to sell a booklet after dinner. Near Beaufort Inlet, the site long identified as the wreck of the flagship has offered up hundreds of artifacts. Cannons of different origins suggest a captain who armed a ship with what the season offered: French pieces alongside English, a practical mix seen often on pirate craft. Lid shot lies in trays, like heavy raindrops frozen in mid-fall. Stakes, breech plugs, and fragments of small arms fill a picture of a deck ready for close work. Grape shot clusters designed to turn a crowd into a floor adds to that picture. Anchors tell a quieter story. A large ship needs iron to hold its place, where sand shifts daily. Galley bricks, cookware, and storage jars turn the camera toward meals that tasted of salt and smoke. Medical instruments complete the scene: mortar and pestle, small weights for measuring powders, and metal syringes of the day that point toward the treatment of diseases common in tight quarters and busy ports. Sounding weights, simple tools dropped on a line to read depth and bottom, hint at how often pilots and captains felt for the sea's shape. The artifacts travel from salt to conservation tanks, where months and years teach them to live in air. Concretion hard shells of mineral that grew around metal must be chipped and soaked away with patience that refuses to hurry. Each object then sits under a light while someone writes what it says in a ledger, only a little different from the ledgers pirates once signed when counting shares. Maps and havens deserve a slow, respectful pass. Ocracoke is the name everyone remembers now, but Topsail, Inlet, Beaufort, Cape Fear, and the trick routes among the Bahamas formed the chessboard for earlier moves. New Providence and Nassau, with their mixed society of wreckers, merchants, sailors, and officials who read wind as well as law, served as both market and rumor mill. In these places, information moved with the speed of a small boat hugging coast, and with the speed of a whisper crossing a tavern. Geography is a character in this story with lines of its own. Long shoals that break swells into friendly chop, sudden cuts between banks where water rushes like a hallway breeze, and marshes that hide narrow guts just wide enough for a skiff and just deep enough for a sloop at high tide. He knew these lines like a song. Under the coat of smoke and bravery, the economy beats a steady rhythm. Plunder became money by passing through hands that disinfected it with signatures. A merchant bought a cargo of sugar or indigo at a discount steep enough to make his conscience catch its breath. A clerk stamped a paper in a small office where the air smelled of ink and damp fiber, declaring the goods salvaged or lawfully possessed. A storehouse owner offered shelter for a fee. Shares flowed from those exchanges. A captain took a double share or more, a quartermaster a little less, gunners and boatswains, something measured against their skill and risk. Men looked at coins and saw not only profit but also future medical care, new clothes, and a cushion against bad weather. Wealth was heavy when it sat in a chest. It was safer when it sat in a dozen pockets, and in favors owed by people who owned roofs. Memory and media kept shaping the captain for centuries after the tide erased the blood from the planks. Early woodcuts made fast for pamphlets that sold better than sermons on slow days, froze him with smoke, blades, and a stance designed to make readers point and say the name aloud. A well-known early history of pirates collected anecdotes, court records, and coffeehouse tales into a volume that still leans on shelves today. It helped standardize details even when it gathered them imperfectly. Later eras added tastes of their own. Victorian writers leaned into moral turns and redemptions. 20th century films and television shows amplified the most visual traits: beard, smoke, flag, while compressing timelines and blending other men's deeds into one coat so that the plot could run instead of walk. In each retelling, two truths remained. He used theater to control fear, and he used water's shape to control pursuit. Evidence remains the anchor that keeps the story from drifting toward easy fantasy. Trial records show voices under pressure, but they still give details that match across cases. Depositions from captured sailors align with the general shape of events known from other sources. Port records and colonial newspapers mention ships taken and cargoes lost in the language of money and insurance. The archaeological site balances the page with iron and wood. The rule for weighing these things is plain. When separate witnesses describe the same tool, place, or trick with no reward for agreeing, a listener can relax into belief. When a pamphlet's only support for a sensational scene is the need to sell, the listener can enjoy the paragraph and keep it in the drawer labeled entertaining. Now the story can set down its verdict, careful and clear. The label madness belongs mostly to headlines and sermons. The man beneath it preferred method. Intimidation was not an accident. It was a strategy. Medicine was not a prop. It was leverage that made cities move and crews stay alive. Seamanship in shallow water was not a convenience. It was a shield chosen and used with knowledge others did not have. The beard fuse trick risked a singe if mishandled, but slow match was made to smolder, and a professional knows how close to hold a flame. The famous flag was a message system with variants, some drawn by later hands. The core idea, threat calibrated to enforce surrender fast, was constant. Buried treasure, multiple wives, and drunken frenzy belong mostly to stories that taste good at midnight. What remains unknown can stay unknown without spoiling the meal. The exact words spoken on the deck at Ocracoke, the precise number of men behind him on his strongest day, the full map of favors granted and owed in ports that rarely wrote down what they should not have allowed. The truth is enough. A captain who staged fear to save blood and who made water itself his ally. A quick round of answers tidies the last corners. The beard fuse trick did carry small risks, but slow matches burn with steady smoke rather than lightning flame, and experience set safe distances. He was not the most violent by habit. He leaned on appearances to end fights before they started. Drink accompanied many crews, but his plans show a mind that calculated tides and temper with cool hands. Flags shifted in iconography. Artists later fixed them more sharply than life did. His peak command strength varied, sometimes swelling when consorts sailed with him, and thinning after losses or pardons. Charleston focused on medicine, though other goods changed hands. The point was to control life, not just wealth. Treasure rarely slept underground for long. Value moved in markets and into friendly hands. Frigates disliked the sounds for good reasons. Shallow water belongs to local craft and to those who listen to land and sky. For those who enjoy following trails, the path ahead is easy to walk. Collections of depositions and trial minutes offer plain speech. Colonial newspapers in port towns capture the week's shock and rumor with dates attached. Reports and conservation notes from the wreck site turn the talk of guns and tools into photographs and measurements. Regional museums tie these threads into rooms where models, maps, and artifacts give the eyes the same pleasure the ears found tonight. Search terms help his name with depositions, trial, Ocracoke, Charleston blockade, or Queen Anne's revenge. Conservation will open the right doors. What remains is the soft closing cadence that belongs to a good harbor. At night, smoke curls from a lantern and then is gone. The tide turns in a channel that barely speaks its change. The deck of a small sloop creaks under a new watch. A name that once stopped men from breathing now sits back down among other names that wait their turn to be spoken. Fear can be staged, and a staged fear can win real battles. Somewhere along the Carolina coast, a pilot in an old boat looks at water the way a librarian looks at a familiar shelf. The banks still shift. The inlets still open and close. The sea keeps its memory and forgives nothing. The captain who understood that is gone, but the understanding remains. The story ends with the smoke finally out and the tide moving seaward, leaving the channel quiet after the loudest legend passed.